Welcome to What We Made Possible, the podcast where we explore the power of healing and driving change for advocates, leaders, and change makers. The conversations here draw the connection between creating new possibilities in the world, possibilities of care, of belonging, of thriving for our communities, with stories of personal healing and loving relationship building. I'm your host, Patty Dayleg, leadership coach for social change. I spent a decade in nonprofits, government, and DEI, securing 6- and 7-figure opportunities for communities of color. And I've experienced firsthand the transformative power of compassion, healing, and belonging in making a bigger impact. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What We Made Possible. I'm Patty Dayleg, your host and leadership coach for social change. So this episode is a little bit of a behind the scenes. I want to talk about my rebrand. This is the first time I'm talking about it. If you're on my email list, then you've heard about it via email. You've probably seen the Instagram or LinkedIn visuals. You may or may not have seen the new website, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about like the behind the scenes of it. And mostly I want to talk about how this is really, it was my permission slip to lead from like who I really am. And I want to offer that to you if you are thinking about how you lead now, especially the day that I'm recording this. Congress and the Senate have passed a spending bill that is the largest wealth transfer in our country's history, taking from the people who need it the most and transferring wealth to those who are already wealthy, taking away Medicaid, taking away SNAP benefits, taking away a lot of clean energy impacts, and really giving tax breaks to people who don't need it at all. And so that's the kind of political context that we're in right now at this moment. And I'm thinking about like, what does that mean for me and the work that I do as a leadership coach and a facilitator and a consultant for organizations that do mission-based work, especially those who work in community. And what does it mean for you as a leader, right? Like, what does it mean to be a nonprofit that depends on funding in order to do this work? And an organization that serves community, the need for your services is going to be even greater, like even more, right? The need for direct service work, the need for mutual aid, the need for organizing, the need for advocacy, the need for coalition work is going to just grow in the next decade because of what we are seeing at the federal level. I also want to name that there are some organizations that I work with who have never been funded by these bigger federal level policies. And so they're not losing out, but the need is still so great because of the folks that they serve. So that's a political context. And because of that, I really want to just name, what does leadership look like? And what does that look like for me? And what does that mean for a brand that is trying to support folks of color, trying to support children of immigrants and folks who are trying to support communities? I've evolved, and Malaya Solutions has evolved as well. I started this company back in 2017. I first started coaching. My first day of coach training was also my first day of work in government doing DEI work. And so I've been doing, all of this alongside each other for a long time. And I think about who I was back then and who I am now. And where this work has taken me, we get to lead differently than who we were before, right? That's what I want to kind of name, just like where I'm at now, what is grounding me in the work and how that shows up in like how I show up in a room, how I facilitate. So it's going to be a little bit messy. I usually work with a script, but today I'm working with an outline. So bear with me. There's going to be some realness, probably a few tangents, and we're just going to go. So I'm going to share a few stories. There's 3 or 4 that I really want to share, and you'll see them reflected in the brand, in the website, in my visuals, but also just in like how I show up in the world. These are kind of just grounding stories for like how we show up. And as you listen, I really want to invite you to think about who are you right now in this current climate? Who are you in the work that you want to do? And what grounds you? First story is really about performative professionalism. And I'm going to ground that story in the story of my emotional support blazer. As I mentioned, back in 2017, I was working in government, right? And I had this blazer that I would keep at the office. No matter what I was wearing, I always kept this blazer in the office if I needed to meet with someone who was like really important or really powerful, or I needed to, like put on kind of my Clark Kent glasses and just like be a quote unquote professional person within government. That emotional support blazer really served me because I was definitely not a person who showed up that way, right? Like I didn't show up in a suit every day like many of my colleagues did. I didn't show up with an air of like, hey, listen to me, I am an authority. The level of professionalism, I think I will say professionalism is really steeped in white supremacy culture. Who gets to be in the room, right? Who is professional and how we dress as professionals. It's rooted in white supremacy culture, like the suit, right? Like how we show up. You think of who is professional, you think of a white man. And so that's just not who I am. And personally, I have not worn a blazer since March 2020, which was the last time I worked in like a formal office. Even when I took another job after working in government, I never wore a blazer. It represents safety. It represents visibility. It represents assimilation for me. This like costume that I needed to put on in order to kind of like fit in with the professional world. And, Malaya, the word Malaya means free, an adjective free, like I am free. And the fact that there are no blazers in this rebrand, like you will never actually see me in public in a blazer. I don't think I even own one anymore. That is about stepping into leadership without having to be a certain person. So the question that I have for you as you listen to this is, what would it look like if your leadership didn't require a costume? And it's a question that a lot of my clients really grapple with, especially those who are emerging leaders. Maybe they've come from non-traditional workspaces and then they're coming into an office for the first time and they feel like they have to perform a certain way. Or maybe they have come from corporate and then all of a sudden they're working in community space, right? What does it mean to try and copy and paste those experiences onto the community space and like to bring that white dominant culture into, let's say, a cultural organization? We don't have to do that, right? We don't need to wear that costume. We don't need to perform. And so I really wanted to incorporate that in the brand. The designers, when I was first working with them, gave me the visuals. So actually, I had this realization because while I was in the process of the rebrand and thinking about what to wear for the photos, the designers actually suggested that I wear a suit. And, it's a non-traditional fit and everything, but I was like, there's just something that doesn't sit right with me. And it was actually that prompt that made me realize, no, actually, I don't want to wear this blazer anymore. Like it was an emotional support, kind of like the Clark Kent glasses, and I don't need to do that anymore. For you, what do you not need to do anymore based on where you're at as a leader? Okay, second story. My mom was in the photos with me. So you'll see a kind of middle-aged woman in photos with me on the website and throughout my visuals where my mom is in it. And the reason why is, I talked about this a little bit in my episode with Dee Dee. I grew up in an intergenerational household. My family was kind of the landing space. Their home was the landing space for new immigrants coming from the Philippines in our family. So titas, titos, cousins, whoever, they would come from the Philippines or wherever they were living before. When they were immigrating to the U.S., they would actually stay with us for months, sometimes years. And actually, I lived in a house that was owned by an uncle for a pretty long time in Jersey City. And I never grew up with less than 3 generations in my household. Always had a grandparent or someone with me. This also shows up in the work that I do, because a lot of the organizations that I work with, that intergenerational and relational leadership is so core to what they do. I have, family run orgs, board members who are sisters, clients who bring their kids to work and who bring their kids to retreats. We've created retreats where we have brought in childcare, because these dynamics are very real in people's work, right? Malaya Solutions is not like a cookie cutter, sterile consulting organization. I work with organizations that are like real humans and real families and real like people who have deep roots with each other, deep relationships with each other. And so I really wanted to reflect that in the brand. I have folks who are retiring professionals who are in, a second or third career right alongside first-time employees, sometimes within the same organization. And, there's a dynamic there that if you have not experienced that before, if you've never been in an organization like that as a consultant, there's just dynamics you're not going to see. Folks who have only worked in corporate, where, you're coming in and maybe someone because, you were referred into the work or something. But if you have only worked, like your relationship with your colleagues is not a personal one, it's just like we work together and that's it. Those are completely different relationships than board members or sisters, right? And so I really center those relationships. There's lineage there, there's interpersonal dynamics there, there's family politics there. If you've ever watched, this is not a nonprofit small organization, but if you've ever watched Succession and you have seen the dynamics of the family and who gets to lead, you will see that there's so much there, right? It's not just about who is the next CEO. It's about who in the family is going to be the next leader of this kind of dynasty, right? Of this thing that like is connected to the entire family. I say this all to say that I work with systems, I work with relationships, I work with lineage, not just individuals. And I really wanted to reflect that. So you'll see my mom in these pictures. I think she's also a gorgeous human. My mom actually was a model at some point. She was a singer. She was in a singing competition at some point and then actually recused herself from the competition, and her competitor became a famous singer in the Philippines. That'll tell you a little bit about my mom. And I really wanted to give like this moment and also just to honor our relationship as well and just show people where I come from. Yeah. Okay, third thing is you'll see an image of a pineapple. There you'll see me like holding pineapples. There's like photos of like baby pineapples along with some of the books that ground me in my work. And the pineapple is a symbol of colonization in the Pacific, right? It's a colonizer crop, but it's also a cultural symbol because piña, which is the fiber that's made of pineapple, is the main fiber that is used for our traditional wear. So if you see like men's barongs or women's like Maria Claras, and it's like a very typical material for a lot of our formal wear. It is this like cultural symbol. Every president has, I think in history, who has visited the Philippines has worn a barong when visiting. This is like very much a symbol of the Philippines, where my family is from. And it's also, I learned this really interesting history at a conference back when I was in college about how Filipino revolutionaries would use the fiber for resistance. So if you've ever seen a barong, you will see that it is a little bit see-through. And today, people will often wear a tank top underneath. They'll use it as a kind of a layer because it's see-through. And then you'll see intricate patterns within the fiber. And the more intricate, the more, extravagant the barong is. But back in the day, Filipino revolutionaries used to use weaving of the fiber to spread revolutionary messages, which I think is dope, right? Like, I saw a thing online where they said, in our efforts to decolonize, we often talk about going back to pre-colonial roots, right? Like, we very much romanticize who our people were pre-colonially. Like in the Philippines, we were several hundreds, maybe thousands of tribes with different languages, and we're not one people, right? Like, my family is Kapampangan, Pangasinan, Ilocano, but we weren't all one people. And it really was the colonization of Spain that created the Philippines, right? If you don't know, the island of the Philippines is named after King Philip of Spain. When we talk about decolonizing, a lot of conversation is about going back to pre-colonial roots. So if I was strictly to do that, then like you would never see a pineapple in my work. But when we do this, right, when we focus strictly on pre-colonial, then we effectively ignore, right, like the hundreds of years and the generations of folks who have navigated colonization. It is part of our history, right? The revolution and the fight against it is part of our history, not just like what happened before Spain came to the Philippines or like before, my family came to the US. And I just want to name, right? We're right in the thick of empire. I live in the States. I'm a second generation immigrant. I am right in the thick of it. I live in a neighborhood where like ICE raids are happening, in a country where funding for the removal of immigrants and like the war on immigrants is better funded than some entire country's militaries based on this last federal budget, right? So the resistance is part of the work, right? How are we doing things that make a difference? How are we centering the people who are impacted today, right, while honoring those that came before us, right? So the work that I do with folks, especially in the leadership context, is that they are coming back to like their histories, right? There's like a reclamation, there's a return, there's an unlearning, there's a reclamation of culture. And a lot of the folks that I work with already have such deep roots in their culture. It's a question of, okay, when you are making a whatever decision, are you making it with that value in mind? When you are designing a program, what are you bringing in, right? When you are struggling with delegating as a new manager, how is that actually a result of colonization? How is it a result of oppression? And how can you weave this resistance into your work, right? Like, how can your own skill growth, how is that also a reclamation of your culture? So my question for you connected to this is, what are you ready to unlearn, right? What are you reclaiming? And the last thing that I'll say about the pineapple is that I love the show Severance. And there's this duality of self at work and outside. And the pineapple is a very prominent theme within Severance. I'm not going to get into the different meanings of the pineapple within the show, but I just want to name that it is a theme within the show. It is a constant visual. And I want to name that, the show Severance is really just about this duality of self at work versus the self outside. And there's a conversation. I don't know if you've ever seen the show. If you haven't, spoiler alert, there's conversations about reintegration, right? Like reintegrating the parts of yourself. And so that's a lot of the work that I do with folks, is like reintegrating the parts of who you are as a leader and who you are in like a cultural space, that those can be one and the same and very often are, but how do you do it in a way that feels correct for you? And how do you do that as a way of even deepening, right? Like rooting in and deepening. Okay, last story, or last thing that I will say, and I'll probably say more about the rebrand somewhere else in the future, because there's so many other kind of details that I put into the visuals deserve some space and some like breathing space. So the last thing that I'll say is that one of my favorite outfits that I wore in the photo shoot that you'll see very prominently in a lot of the imagery is this all white outfit. It's these like trouser pants and then this almost like barong style top that was white with like brown like weaving. And when I wore it, I was like, oh my God, I look like my Papa Ben. My Papa Ben was my maternal grandfather, so my mom's dad. And he owned a funeral parlor in the Philippines. It was called Lopez Memorial. And the funeral parlor was downstairs from my family's apartment. So they lived on the second floor. The funeral parlor was on the first floor. And, whenever we would come back from being out, we would pass by it, whether it was something happening, whether it was a funeral or a wake happening. Sometimes there were different kind of church services and things at the parlor. And it was very kind of present, like that grief and like just death, right? Like the idea of death was just very present whenever I would go to the Philippines as a kid. And also, it's super interesting because this space was also a third space for a lot of men in the community. A lot of the people who Papa worked with, they would play cards at the house, they would just hang out, waiting for the next kind of job to do or whatever. And like, I find that super interesting that this like grief held space was also like a community space. And I also want to say that Papa's business was also a community building space because he funded the education of a lot of his employees' children. And that's something that my parents do as well, right? Like they've paid for the education of some of my cousins in the Philippines and things. And that organization became this community care space, right? Like this legacy of space holding. So I shared this story because I come from one entrepreneurs, right? Like this, like my grandfather was this business owner, but also I come from like community space holders, people who have literally created physical space for grief, for transitions, for relationships, for healing. And Malaya is designed to hold a similar space, not, in the same way, but it's healing support. It is designed to ripple out, not just to impact the one individual who I'm working with, but also the people who are surrounding that human. I always think about when you are working with an individual, they are within the context of a workplace, they are in relationship to other people. And those relationships impact how they show up, and how they show up impact those relationships, right? And so this work, the work that I do, is designed in that way. Again, it's not just, okay, like, how can this one leader move up in the career ladder? That's not what we're trying to do. It's designed to be about like legacy and leadership building, to be about care for other people. So the reflection that I will leave you with this story is, what legacy is your leadership building? And who are you impacting with your leadership? This conversation is all about integration. It's about like what Malaya means to me and the work and how I show up. These are just some of the pieces of the fullness of the work. It really holds my evolution. It honors my lineage. And I hope that this is a reflection of my commitment to transformational space. So I'll leave you with this. With every story that I shared today about my mom in the photo albums, about the pineapple as resistance, about Papa Ben's funeral home, about the emotional support blazer, I bring that with me into every room that I facilitate. Because my work is not just about coaching individuals, right? It's about building cultures of care, about sitting with grief, about naming what no longer serves us, about imagining and daring to imagine what might take the place of that thing that no longer serves us. If you're looking around your team and saying, what do we need to do? Who do we need to become in order to live into our values? If you are navigating burnout on your team and that is impacting retention, or it's impacting how your team is able to show up to community and to your commitments to community, if you are in leadership transitions, Or if there's another shift or change that your organization is going through, and there's an ache, right, of wanting to become like more aligned, bring me in. So I work with organizations, I work with coalitions, I work with creative spaces, with folks in clean energy, I work with movement folks, with foundations, to really build cultures rooted in compassion, rooted in belonging, rooted in impact in culture. Whether it is we are designing a group coaching experience for your first-time managers, or we are doing healing-centered facilitation for all of your executive directors who are within your coalition. The work is really about building something that is deeper, that is more sustainable. And if that resonates with you, bring me in. Let's co-design a program together for your team, whether it's your board or your staff. You can reach out to me via email. There's also going to be a link in the show notes to book a call with me. Feel free to DM me, reach out however makes sense for you. But if you are in a moment of transition and you want support in these ways, then let's chat. All right. Thank you so much for listening. If any of this resonates, I would love to hear your feedback, and see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to What We Made Possible. I really hope this episode resonated. As a coach, I always end with action steps, and so I invite you to do something, which is to pause and ask yourself, what resonated? What am I taking away? And what's possible for me and my community now? If you liked this conversation, please leave a review and a rating. It helps so much. Thanks again.